All right. Ontology is just how you come to understand yourself, right? So, and you kind of see that play out within the character of the poem, to where she's viewed herself in her blackness a certain way. I'm sorry, this is the Fred Moten poem. It's very like long. Let me see. Give me 1 second, I'll pull up. Because I don't think it has a title. It was.
The second to last poem.
Yeah. Because none of these poems for Fred Moten has a title, so I couldn't really title it for you guys, but I labeled it under All That Beauty Moten. Okay, so the idea of ontology, right, is how you understand yourself, or how you begin to understand yourself. And you see that understanding shift towards the end of the poem, right? She's like, I'm black, you calling me black, you calling me black, right? But then she has more of a positive identification with the terms black. So those are some of the things that stood out to me. So I'm curious to hear what you guys thought about the poem. It was also like hints of Spanish kind of littered throughout the poem that I kind of picked up on, which become very important. So we'll open up to just a conversation, whatever you guys found of interest as it pertains to that poem, and then we'll move on to the next one. Anybody?
Can I go?
Yeah, please.
I found it very like empowering, how she was like, she was like, yeah, I'm black.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing wrong about it. Like she came to terms like who she was, and she accepted it, like you were saying, ontology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I just found that empowering. Like as a black woman, she was making her place in the world and wasn't letting anything bother her.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Did you guys like the poem? You don't have to like the poem. Like it's okay. That's why I chose a variety of them. Some of them stick, some of them won't. Did anybody not like the poem, or did not understand the poem? Found it confusing? Y'all good? Did y'all read the poem?
Not gonna lie, I found the poem pretty confusing, but I don't know. I'm not really into poetry, so like, a lot of these were confusing for me. Like I had to reread them over and over to fully understand them. Like, poetry's not my thing, but so I don't really get. I got the point she was trying to make, like in the beginning when it's like, oh, they're yelling at her that she's a black woman, and she's like, yeah, I'm black. Like, what about it? But like the random like writing or the random language and stuff, I was like, where does that come in? Like, I don't know, I just didn't understand that.
So very good point, Alyssa. Fred Moten, right? He's one of my favorite thinkers, but he is probably one of the hardest people to understand. Like just period. Like, his poetry is very abstract, and his intellectual writing is even more abstract. He's currently teaching at NYU. He has spent some time in the UCR. Brilliant individual, but he's very opaque. Like he's confusing, and he loves to play with words, just throw random words in the middle of sentences, right? And often words that contradict each other, he loves to mush those together. So Alyssa, I completely understand. Anybody else have some thoughts on the poem?
I agree with Elisa. I think that, sorry. I like the poem. I mean, the poem was confusing, but I liked it, and I think he got the point kind of across towards the beginning. So yeah.
Yeah. This is probably one of his more simplistic poems, like if I could call it that, you know what I mean? Did anybody look up, I'm gonna fuck this up because I don't speak Spanish, but I believe Garyon Negra, did anybody look that up?
So that phrase is me gritan negra, and that translates to they yell at me that I'm black. Like they call her black. That's the Spanish way of saying it.
So thank you, Valerie, excuse me. I looked that up, right? And what that provided me insight into This poem is a poem based off of another poem, right? By a Peruvian poet. Her name is, what's her name? Victoria Santa Cruz. And this is a rip off of her poem. So it's kind of like a remix, if you want to call it that. So what I want to do is play the original poem to see if it helps make the poem make a little bit more sense. Give me 1 second.
Tenía 7 años apenas 7 años. ¿Qué 7 años? No llegaba a 5 siquiera. De pronto unas voces en la calle me gritaron, negra, 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 negra. ¿Soy acaso negra? Me dije. Sí. ¿Qué cosa es ser negra? Negra. Yo no sabía la triste verdad que aquello escondía. Negra. Y me sentí negra. Negra. Como ellos decían. Negra. Y retrocedí. Negra. Como ellos querían. Negra. Yo odié mis cabellos y mis labios gruesos y miré apenada mi carne tostada y retrocedí. Negra. Y retrocedí. Negra, 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 negra. Pasaba el tiempo y siempre amargada. Seguía llevando a mi espalda mi pesada carga. Y cómo pesaba. Me alacé el cabello. Me volvé la cara. Entre mis entrañas siempre resonaba la misma palabra. ¡Negra! 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 Hasta que un día que retrocedía y que iba a caer. ¡Negra! 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 ¿Qué? ¿Y qué? ¡Negra! ¡Sí! ¡Negra! ¡Soy! ¡Negra! 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 ¡Soy! ¡Negra! ¡Sí! ¡Negra! ¡Soy! ¡Negra! ¡Negra! ¡Soy! Yo hoy en adelante no quiero laciar mi cabello. ¡No quiero! Y voy a reírme de aquellos que por evitar, según ellos, que por evitarnos algún sinsabor, llaman a los negros gente de color. ¿Y de qué color? ¡Negro! ¿Y qué lindo suena? ¡Negro! ¿Y qué ritmo tiene? ¡Negro, negro, 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 negro! Al fin comprendí. ¡Al fin! Ya no retrocedo. ¡Al fin! Y avanzo segura. ¡Al fin! Avanzo y espero. ¡Al fin! Y bendigo al cielo porque quiso Dios que negro hasta abajo fuese mi color y ya comprendí. ¡Al fin! Ya tengo la llave. ¡Negro, negro, 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 negro!
So 1 second, let me see. There we go, okay. So did that help kind of contextualize the poem at all? Help it make a little bit more sense for anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually like it a lot. Like, I like the poem now with more context, because like that little strip of sentence,
Yep.
just like they were yelling at me and I'm like, so what? But like with that, it tells like, you know, her feelings throughout the whole process and all that. So yeah, I like that better.
Yes, absolutely, Alyssa. And that's why I wanted to make sure I showed that, because even when we talk about the hips and the twisting of the hips, that's where that derives from, right? And then Cassandra, yes, that's why he includes the different languages. And for me, I picked up on that and I was like, man, let me look that shit up, because one, I wanted to understand what he was saying, because I don't speak Spanish. Thank you, Valeria, for translating that for me. But in doing so, it put me on to her, to the Victoria Santa Cruz. Beautiful poem. I love the thrust and the spirit of the poem. Even the whole aesthetic of her and the people that were playing background to her poem. I loved it all. So I really dig what Moten was up to with that one. So any other comments before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Fred Moten, he's a male, right?
Yeah.
So he's writing the poem in the perspective of Santa, I forgot her name already.
Victoria Santa Cruz.
Victoria Santa Cruz. So he's writing the poem from her perspective?
Yeah, it's like an homage, if you will, to the poem that she wrote. So he's picking up from that poem and making his own work out of what she's doing. Which brings up a good point, because if you think about intellectual or scholarly work, that's what we do, right? We'll read a thinker, that'll give us a thought, and it will produce something entirely different or similar, but it's inspired by the thought of the thinkers that we are studying, right? So that's purely intellectual work. So that's a very good point to pick up on, Ariane. Next we'll move into the poem Spill. The actual poem that we read was For Harriet. Is very short, or For Harriet Tubman. I don't know if y'all can see that. So this is the one that we'll move from. This is from the book Spill. The author is Alexis Pauline Gumbs, really brilliant thinker. So this, did you guys read like the intro to this poem? Like I included the intro to the book before the poem. And the reason for doing that is to kind of give you guys a little bit more insight to the project that Pauline Gumbs was into. So this is based off of a thinker who she, was a mentor of hers, who she really admired. Her name was Hortense Spiller, right? And if you notice, the book is entitled Spill. So even that is a rift from her own name, right? And she goes on to say how, I'll read a little passage. Again and again, there were phrases in her work that did far more than make her point. They made worlds. They invited affect with an A. They brought to mind nameless women in unknown places who were laughing and looking sideways at each other, and a world that couldn't understand them. We're gonna go back to the very bottom. This space, which is a temporary space, which we must leave for the sake of future travelers and our own necks, is a sacred, dedicated space. Libation for the name and the nameless. This is for Black women who made and broke narratives, the quiet, the quarreling, the queer. This is where, this is what, this is how. And then she gives you the definition of spill: to cause or allow liquid to flow over the edge of its container, especially unintentionally. You'll spill that coffee if you're not careful. Synonyms: knock over, tip over, upset, overturn. So I think what's important is the upset and the overturn, right? And the work that she's seeking to do is to upset and overturn these normal modalities that Black women are trapped into, right? And who better to kind of pull inspiration from than Harriet Tubman, right? So I think for me, what I gathered from this poem is very short, is that she's interested in being in women who are actional, right? Who are willing to take action, who wanted to do things, to move things, right? And then there's also the seeming contradictions, right? Knowing is not no, right? So to me, that's something that was very interesting. And then also a shifting in realities I kind of picked up, right? She has one reality where she's kind of, putting the things on the table, and it's kind of domesticated, right? But she has a desire to do more, and that's where the actionability comes from, where they want to be, where she wants to be actional. And Pauline Gumbs writes her desire to be actional into the poem, right? The desire to let's go, right? And that's where the action kind of comes in. Again, very short. Also, I try to make it clear in the Google Classroom doc when I posted this. This poem is separate from the poem on the previous page. I just wasn't able to just copy this one page. So they're not related. But what's interesting, if you read them, you can see where they could relate, right? But for me, I know it's a separate poem because it's titled For Harriet. She actually gives us the title for this poem. So again, it's really short. There's not really a lot to it, but I'm also still curious to hear your guys' thoughts. And again, it can be something as simple as I did not like it. I did not get it. The thing about poetry is about interpretation, right? You have to contemplate a little bit and reflect and see what you think they're trying to get you to get at. And a lot of it is just about trusting your intuition, trusting your insight, and believing what you read is what you read and going from that. So thoughts? None?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. What's up?
I was gonna say like how I was a little like lost like besides because I thought they were connected, but I kind of reread it a little bit right now, and how like it was kind of like confusing the part where she's like, if I worked day and night, I would be free, but her daughter's heartbeat like stole the piece of her. I was kind of confused because like I kind of interpreted that as like even though she'll be free like mentally, like her daughter will still have that hold on her. I was a little lost on that part.
So so that's on the other poem, right? On the first page.
Yes.
I would have to go back and read the entire poem to know. Because again, remember, like this is separate.
It's in like the last paragraph.
What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just read the whole poem and kind of see if I could get an interpretation. So just bear with me
okay.
a quick second. Okay. Okay, so in the previous page, it's really about her desire to take care of her daughter. And it really discusses the connection between the mother and the daughter. And then if you go to the next page where she says, you know, she could work day and night. Her conscience would be free, but her daughter's heartbeat, inescapable, stole the piece of her pulse that was true. So like her conscience would allow her to work day and night because that's going to allow her to support her family, right? But that daughter's heartbeat kind of pulls at her, and because if she's working day or night, she's not with her family. And it goes on the previous page, shows how hands-on she has to be with getting her daughter just to be maintained, right? So she kind of feels conflicted by the need to support the family, right? To work day and night, but then also the need to be home and to take care of and nurture her daughter. So that's why the daughter's heartbeat is tugging at her. Does that make a little more sense? Okay.
It does. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So let's just read the For Harriet piece real quick. This can never be equal to this. Every way she set the table, every form of rice she put on the edge of the other side of sugar, every stitch through cotton and the numbness of her fingertips, nothing is not even equal to nothing. Knowing is not equal to know. So she renamed herself after her mother, left her dirtbag husband, looked up at her North Star, God, and said, let's go. So one, to kind of understand this, you have to know a little bit about Harriet Tubman and what she did, right? Especially the end. As she tried to navigate to freedom, she used the North Star to help her navigate to the north, right? Because that was an underground railroad, went from the southern states to the northern states up to Canada, right? So she's being guided by the North Star. I believe her original husband did not want to leave the plantation. So that's why she got rid of her dirtbag husband and said, let's go, right? But I'm gonna be real, like, so a lot of this shit I don't understand, right? This can never be equal to this. What are you talking about? So what are these this? You know what I mean? She doesn't make that known, right? The stitch through the cotton and the numbness of her fingertips, right? To me, it's just domestic work, right? She's repairing clothes and things of that nature, things that people who were enslaved would do. But to me, this is kind of interesting, and it leaves a lot for interpretation. Knowing, so the ability to know something, to be aware, to have knowledge of, right, is not equal to know. So to me, what I kind of gathered within that, knowledge or information gives you access, right? So, because know, it prohibits you, it stops you, right? But knowing, so the information, the ability to gather information does not determine to know, or does not impede your progress, right? So what I get gleaned from that is you must gather information so you can move forward. Because how she ends the poem is with "let's go," right? And her knowledge of the North Star allowed her to go, right? So to me, that's a very subtle but brilliant contradiction that she places in the poem. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about the poem?
So is she saying the more you know, the farther you'll go?
Yep. Or the more you know, the more access that you have, or the more yeses that you'll be able to come across in life, opposed to the no's that's going to prohibit your progress. So the key is to know, N-O-W, right? To have knowledge, to get aware, to be aware. Any other thoughts?
I like both of the poems. I like the first poem's rhyme scheming, and the second poem, I thought it was interesting how she connected like Harriet Tubman to like the history of Black women and stuff like that. So I thought that was nice. I enjoyed it.
She's really dope. So like this book is a trilogy of books. I haven't read the third one, but I've read Dove. So this one, she kind of plays with mixing reggae music, hence Dove, things of that nature. The ability just to bring different things together. This is the first component. This is the second one, the Dove. I haven't read this yet, but I heard it's really good also. So if you're into feminism, if you're into fugitivity, if you're into poetry, she's a great person to kind of look into and research. I believe she's out of North Carolina. But yeah, she's a contemporary scholar. She's doing her work now. That's another thing I did. So I put her and Moten on the table because these are poets that are in our moment now, right? They're writing in the 2020s. So we'll shift from the now to a little bit further in time, right? We'll go into the 60s with Nikki Giovanni. Has anybody heard of Nikki Giovanni before? No? Yeah. Nikki Giovanni is like really a world-renowned poet. I believe she came to Cal State about twice in the early 2000s. So she gave us the two poems, Black Power and Seduction. And to me, where I gather the differences between how poets write now, juxtaposed to how they're writing back in the day. To me, how they wrote back in the day is a lot more clearer, a lot more easier to understand. A little bit more opaque, a little bit more abstract when you're thinking about Moten, when you're thinking about Pauline Gumbs. But Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, who we'll get to next, is a little more straightforward for me. You kind of get to understand their project very cleanly. So let's start with Black Power. So for me, what this spoke to is just what the Black Panthers meant to the community, right? Like what their work did symbolize for those who were impacted by their work, right? You see her use the term miracle. And then also the poem speaks to like a counterforce to dehumanization and humiliation, right? She says, we weren't smoking no weed, we were just hanging out in the corner. Cop comes up, tells us to move and calls us whores, right? So the Black Panther Party, the symbol of the Black Panther Party represents the counter force to that dehumanization, right? Yeah, so I'll put it on pause for that one. So I do want to hear your guys' thoughts on the Black Power poem. And think about too, what
Personally,
go ahead.
I love the way he had this kind of story in the background. Like you have to actually like read into it a bit more, where like they say they pounced the cop or like they pounced Tyrone. It was, I don't know, it was not really clear on that.
Yeah, pounced on him. You're right.
But yeah, and they kind of write this story about how there was a police shooting because the Panther was missing, talking about Tyrone,
Yeah.
and how it just went over the media's head.
Yeah.
So it just kind of writes the story about how it was during that time.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I just want to say, like, I agree with what they said because I thought at the end of the poem, like, I thought it was like interesting because it's just like how none of the zoos like reported, and it kind of like ties it all together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite parts too. Just like there's no panther missing from the zoo, right? So just let you know it's not an animal. This is the work of the Black Panther Party that we're speaking of. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. So how about the? Did you guys read the play Seduction? The one next to it, or I'm sorry, the poem Seduction. I was really just assigning the Black Power one, so if you didn't read it, no big deal. But if you did, let's talk about it. But it doesn't look like no one's read it, correct? All right. So let's move into Baldwin, and then we'll have one more after that. So the Baldwin one, it was a little long, but I think it moved pretty fast, right? I don't think it was a long read, it's just a longer poem. So there's a lot going on in that poem, right? He has a lot, and he moves through things very quickly. The role of nostalgia becomes the theme, the desire for nobility, the conquering of the Caribbean. This idea of the offer that you cannot refuse, right? Tying in with manifest destiny. And then there's a lot of irony in the poem, and there's almost an element of satire in the poem as well. And then the juxtaposition between capital punishment, right? People being killed for crimes, juxtaposed to abortions, right? And he kind of plays and he teases that out a little bit. And then he has this idea, right, that calling yourself X only makes it worse as it pertains to we don't know our names, we don't know our history, and calling yourself X doesn't remedy that, it only makes it worse. So I thought that was an interesting claim. And then it's like, for me, I was curious as to what you guys thought, who he was writing to, right? Like who is, not to say his audience, but he's writing this to a particular segment of people, right? And then also what position was he writing from? Something that I thought about. And then again, with Baldwin, right? This notion of innocence and the desire to maintain innocence becomes very prevalent in the poem. So those are my thoughts. So let's hear some people's thoughts about the Baldwin poem, and then we'll move into our last one. Did you guys read the Baldwin poem?
Can I comment on it?
Yeah, please.
It was the Black Love Supreme, right?
Which one?
It's the one titled Black Love Supreme, right?
No, that's not Baldwin. The Baldwin one, we're going to do that one next. The Baldwin one was Staggerly Wonders. It's like, I always wonder what they think the niggas are doing while the pink alabaster pragmatists are containing Russia. It starts off with like that.
Sorry, I got them mixed up. Okay.
No worries. Did y'all read that? Because if you didn't read it, we can't talk about it. Okay, you didn't see that. All right, so let's move on to the Black Love Supreme poem. I think I posted the Baldwin one after the fact too, so no big deal. So I don't really have any notes for that one. What do you guys, Eileen, if you want to start us off?
Okay. I thought it was like interesting, like how like I could kind of tie like one of the quotes he said. He said like how I could sense the energy and tension in your hair, how they tell a story of survival and fugitivity, providing the maps to like freedom. And like I kind of thought about how like that actually has like meaning. Like it's not just like him saying they hold a story, because like I believe it's like how box braids, how the reason box braids were created was because they would put rice in them. And I thought it was interesting, like how it connects to like, it's not just him like saying words, like, there's actual history behind it.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And also that ties to the poem about Harriet Tubman, right? She puts the rice on a certain side of the table because they would also braid rice into their hair. So when they're running away, right, they braid their hair to have rice to eat while they're on the run. So yes, that's a very good pickup. And then sometimes they would braid the hairs in designs to where there would be maps as to where to go. Good point, Eileen. Anybody else have ideas on the Black Love Supreme poem?
Can I comment?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I don't know. I got this like vibe when I first started reading. I kind of felt like the person writing was like white.
Really?
Like, yeah, I don't know. I felt because they're saying like I've been watching and waiting. Like as a Black person, you experience the type of things they're talking about. You don't just watch. So when they're saying I've been watching you for a while now, I see all that's going on for 400 years. Like it gave me like the vibe that it was like the author wasn't a person of color. I only like got that vibe until I got to like the last page when it was like, I want you to know that you have powerful gods too. Cause like, I don't know, white people, I don't know what white people know, but I don't think white people would know about powerful Black gods if we don't know about it.
Right.
So that was the only like indication of like, I don't know, that it wasn't a white person, but I just felt like the author was white, and because they're like forever indebted. Like, why are you indebted if you're like somebody who's Black? Because like, I don't know, you would have experienced that. You can't be indebted for something that has been happening to you. So yeah, because they're like, I've been watching. And then when it was like the next time that he sees or the next time that you get your neck stepped on, like they're gonna know that I was watching. So I don't know, I just felt like
That's actually interesting, Alyssa. Did anybody else think about that? That didn't cross my mind at all. I just assumed the person was Black.
Now that I'm thinking about it, she does make Alyssa brings a good point that it seems like at first it's written from a perspective. Let's say put in perspective of two lovers, one's white and the other one's African American, and he's like basically telling his lover like I see what you're going through. I've been married to you. I've been with you for so long. I've seen all the pain that you've gone through. But then like at the end, as she stated, you can kind of tell that it wasn't. I don't know.
I agree. I kind of got the same vibe from the poem when I was reading it, because I think at some parts I thought the person was Black, but then when I continued reading it, I was kind of like, is this a white person writing to a Black person about a Black person?
So for me, I played it out in my head as a man and a woman, right? And the conversation around Black men not supporting Black women as they're going through these atrocities, right? So we can think about historically, on the plantation, the man had to watch his woman get snatched up from him and be raped, right? He was forced to watch. We fast forward to today, how many times do you see women be assaulted, be abused, be verbally assaulted, and you see hands of men watching and just recording, right? So for me, that's what I gleaned from the watching. But not to say that y'all wrong, you know what I mean? I didn't think about that. And really hearing her say that, I was like, wow, it kind of makes me think about the poem in a different way. Anybody else?
I kind of agree with both of you guys, because like when I was reading it, I wasn't sure like because he said for 37 years, so I was like unsure if they were together or not. And then towards the end, I was like, what if this is like from the perspective of a bystander? But like hearing Alyssa like make the comment, it totally like clicked for me, and I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense.
Yeah, yeah. She switched my whole interpretation of the poem also. So I mean, but to me, that's what's dope about poetry, right? She's not wrong. Nobody's wrong. It's just purely your interpretation. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh, I don't know. Hearing you guys, because I didn't think about it like that way at all. Like didn't think about it like from a relationship type point of view or anything. Cause just like I don't know when he's or when whoever is speaking, they're like the things that they point out. They're like I've seen that. Let me see on like page 2. I've seen that when you have talks with your children, it's not the birds and the bees. Like that's something that Black families go through to like you have to give your children the talk about how to like if you get pulled over or something like that's what Black people at like as a whole experience. So it was like I've seen that the talk is like it made it seem like our talk is different than your talk. And then when they say like I've seen witnessing everything that you go through, like I don't know, it just seems like a white person expressing their love for Black people. Like I've just witnessed all this happening to you guys as a whole for like all this time, and like I just want to be supportive, like I just
Yeah, nah. I'm with you. Listen, like again, I'm not even saying that you're wrong. Just for me, when I read it, I didn't think that. Yeah, but again, I fuck with it, man. I think it's an interesting and dope interpretation of the work. Anybody else?
I want to add something.
Yeah.
I was reading it. I genuinely, like, wholeheartedly thought that it was just like someone was writing this poem to a person that they love. Just by how it started, he like the person was like, I like what I wrote down was that I said that I liked how the person not only talked about the physical greatness of the person he's talking about, but also like how they are internally and emotionally. And like for example, they talked about the beauty, the humility, and their strength. And then towards I think it was towards the end or middle, the reason why I really thought it was about a relationship because it said it's time for you to love yourself the way I love you. Just the wording made me feel like you like someone, you want to write a poem to them, and that's what this person was doing. But now hearing everyone else, like it was interpreted in different ways.
Yeah, and again, that's the and so this was considered a poetic, right? So what a poetic is, if you think about what we read with Glissant, writes poetics, right? So it's almost an essay, it's almost a poem. So this would be considered a poetic. So it gives you the ability to play with metaphor. It gives you the ability to play with symbolism, right? So you could write as if you're writing to someone, but it symbolizes a larger idea. So, and again, you're absolutely not wrong, Cassandra. It comes off like he's being it's a love letter to an individual, right? But I think also it stands as a symbol for a larger project. Other thoughts?
Can I go?
Yes,
You could go.
uh, it's okay. You can go first.
So I wrote down a couple things because like I noticed in the poem how he mentions like that the gods see her pain and stuff. And I found it interesting how like he mentions gods, but out of like he just states gods and he only mentions one specifically towards the beginning, which I believe it's I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong, Ashun.
Oshun. Mm-hmm.
And he mentions this goddess when he talks about her smile. So I don't know if it was like trying to compare her smile to that goddess.
So Oshun is the Yoruba god of beauty. So just the deity Oshun, it just symbolizes beauty. So that
Yeah,
helps with the interpretation.
yeah, and I found that interesting. And then also what section that stood out was a quote, I believe it's on the second page, where it says, I know your desire to live, to be viewed as human, to not be considered angry, even when anger is the appropriate response. For to me, like, this kind of got me thinking about, like, not just that, but different situations throughout history with African Americans and people of color. Like, we've talked about it in other discussions how no matter what happens, violence or force gets like associated with them. So that's kind of how I interpreted that quote specifically, like, because it says she's been considered to be angry even if it's like the appropriate way to go about things. Like even if we're doing the right thing, there's still going to be like a negative side to it. And then also I have some questions for the way they ended the poem, because they said forever indebted. So like could you kind of like elaborate on the ending?
Just for me, if I think about being forever indebted, right? It's just like I owe you forever. Like what you've done for me, I can never pay off. So I'm continually trying to pay off that debt, right? So if that kind of answers your question, that's how I interpreted the poem, or the closure, right? Like, so as long as I'm going to be on this earth, I'm going to do what I can to pay back all that you've given me, right? So that's how I kind of viewed it. Does anybody else have a different interpretation?
Yes, I do. I read it like twice. The first time I got your interpretation about two lovers, and then the second time it just kind of flipped entirely. It kind of felt like the speaker is God in a sense, like telling his children that he loves them, and that he's been watching he's seen everything they have gone through. Like, because the one thing that threw me off about the two lovers was the amount of time that has passed. Because I know at one point it says 30 years, and then another point it says 400 years. You know, that kind of like made me scrap that idea. So when I was reading it, I was kind of reading it again as like a sense of God, and telling him that he's there for them, that he loves them, and that he's proud of them because they're his children.
Hey, yo, that's super dope too, though. Like, I didn't think about that, but that's a pretty profound way to think about it, and I think that would apply because, right, if you put it into the context of the creator, the time is irrelevant, right? Like it could be 37 years, it could be 5,000 years. God's going to be able to perceive all of that. Yeah, that's a really good point. Any other questions, comments, concerns, or thoughts about that poem? Which one did y'all like the most, if you had one?
I personally like this one too.
This one.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too.
Same.
I think this one's probably the clearest one to understand too, compared to some of the other ones that we read. Just to keep it 100 with y'all, I wrote the poem. So when I wrote it, I was thinking about Black people as a whole, thinking about more specifically Black women. And again, as I was kind of speaking to earlier, it's just this phenomenon of seeing Black men watching Black women be assaulted, watching them be abused, right? And just watching, and continuously watching and not acting, right? I wrote it this summer when all this shit was going on. It was my way of processing the current moment, right? Breonna Taylor, she kind of really what got me in just the mode to write, right? And this is what I came up with. And I'm 37 years old, so that's where the 37 years came in at, right? And it's been something that I've been observing my whole life, right? Just watching our struggles, watching our plights, and just having a desire to want to do something, right? Having a desire to want to get their foot off our neck, be that physically, be that ideologically, however the case may be, right? But it was really interesting to hear your guys' interpretation of the poem, especially Alyssa's, because I for sure ain't white. But the way that she read it, it makes sense, and she's not wrong, right? And for me as a writer, I'm like, well, damn, I didn't even think that it could come off like that. What were you gonna say, Miracle? Why there's no offer? Yeah, I wanted to keep that a little.
I was confused. I was like, where's the author?
Yeah, I didn't want to give up the bag early. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to be able to talk about it and have you guys give your honest opinion and not feel like, let me say this is dope because the professor wrote it, right? Like, If that shit was whack, I wanted y'all to tell me that shit was whack, and I could kind of go back to the lab and recreate and reproduce, right? So that's why I didn't give up the author. Yeah.
The poem wasn't whack. It was actually a really good poem. Like,
yeah, and to be honest with you, I'm not really into poetry either. Glissant really he left an impression on me, and I love the way he's able to take themes and play with themes. So he kind of really got me into this idea of a poetic. I'm gonna be doing a lot more of those. I'm gonna try to get some shit published in in the near future, a book of poetics, coupled with some other things I'm working on. So yeah, so we'll end our discussion here. Keep in mind, next Tuesday when we meet, we want to be going over our presentations. We'll spend the whole time doing that. And then whatever presentations that we do not get to, we'll pick those up on the day of our final. And I'll have that emailed out to you guys when the final day is, sometime early next week. I know that finals week starts between the 9th and the 15th, I believe it is. So I'll let you guys know well before then. And then we'll just end out our semester there. I know Miracle asked about the number of journals. Let me pull those up. Give me 1 second, okay? So that should be 3. So 6. 7, 8. So that's 8. 11. And then you could just choose one of the poems. So we should have 12 total. Does that sound about right? So it should be 12 total journals that you'll be submitting to me on the day of our final, and just email them to me. Actually, do me a favor. If you could load them up to the Google Classroom site, that'll be best, because that allows me to grade them, and then you guys get the grade, and you'll see me respond to it that way. Are there any other questions that you guys have for me?
So technically we have 4 new ones.
Yes. From the last time you turned them in, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody else? No. All right. Well, you guys enjoy your week. I will see you next week. Be safe. And then just kind of keep an eye out on your emails and the Google Classroom site, so I can let you guys know when our final would be. And then be prepared for your presentations on Tuesday. So make sure you guys are getting together and iron out the final details. I'm really looking forward to seeing those presentations. All right, y'all. Be well, and I'll check you next week.